The observation deck of the station was quiet, almost painfully so. Lyra moved carefully along the smooth, reflective floor, her long, slender fingers brushing against the cold railing. The vastness of space stretched beyond the tall windows, a black expanse dotted with distant stars, glowing planets, and wandering asteroids. Yet despite the beauty outside, the room felt emptier than it ever had. Lyra had always been different. Her theories about interstellar navigation, about bending the very rules of space to travel faster than any known method, had fascinated some but terrified most. The other scientists on the station had labeled her ideas as reckless, impossible, or simply foolish. Because of that, she had learned to sit alone, to eat alone, to speak only when necessary. Her colleagues avoided her as if isolation were contagious, and she had grown accustomed to it, even if it hurt more than she admitted. On this particular day, she sat at her usual spot, near the corner where the view of the starfields was clearest. She pulled her tablet closer and began recalculating her latest data. The numbers swam across the screen, interlaced with equations and diagrams, all pointing toward something that could change travel between stars forever. Yet, even as she studied them, doubt nibbled at her mind. What if she was wrong? What if she truly was alone because her work had no value? The soft hum of the station's engines was the only sound that accompanied her thoughts. Lyra's long tail swished gently behind her as she adjusted her seating. Outside, a nearby shuttle streaked past the station, leaving a faint trail of blue energy behind it. That was the human fleet arriving, she thought. They were always so fast, so unpredictable, so curious. The station had been expecting humans for weeks, yet Lyra had not paid much attention. She was used to observing, not interacting. But that curiosity of hers, that small spark that refused to die even in the face of constant rejection, made her glance up when the main doors opened. A group of humans entered, speaking in their soft, melodic language. Their movements were fluid, casual, yet purposeful. And then she saw him, the human pilot. His uniform was simple, a deep blue that contrasted with the station's metallic interior, but his presence seemed to carry something different, something calm, measured, yet entirely unshakable. He scanned the room, his gaze moving past clusters of chatting aliens until it landed on her. She noticed it immediately. There was no hesitation, no glance away, just a quiet acknowledgement. And then slowly, deliberately, he walked toward her. Lyra felt her chest tighten. She had spent so long avoiding interaction that the very thought of someone voluntarily approaching her made her unsure of what to do. The human stopped a step away, then, with a small nod, he sat down beside her. "Hello," he said softly. His voice was gentle, neither commanding nor pleading. It was just there, neutral, friendly, respectful. Lyra stared at him, her mind blank. Her instinct was to retreat, to move to the far corner where no one could reach her, but something in his calm demeanor made her hesitate. No one had ever sat beside her without some hidden agenda. "I'm Captain Eric," he continued. "I've heard a lot about your work." "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe I've heard enough to know that what you're doing might just save more lives than anyone here realizes." Yet here he was, sitting quietly, speaking softly, acknowledging her work without judgment. A silence stretched between them. She returned her gaze to the tablet, fingers hovering over the screen. The numbers seemed less threatening somehow, as if his presence made them lighter, easier to approach. "You're calculating the rift again?" he observed, nodding toward her screen. Lyra's tail twitched. "It's unstable," she said. "It could expand at any moment. If it reaches inhabited sectors, billions could be affected. They don't want to waste resources on something they don't understand." It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't recklessness, it was confidence, and perhaps something more, something she couldn't quite name. Minutes passed. Neither of them spoke again, yet the silence was comfortable, not awkward. For the first time in a long while, Lyra felt the heavy weight of loneliness ease slightly. Then the warning lights on her console blinked urgently. The rift readings had spiked, far beyond anything she had calculated. The numbers on her screen glowed red, a stark contrast against the black backdrop of the observation deck. "This is worse than I thought," she muttered, her voice tight with concern. Eric stood, moving to the console beside her. His hands hovered over the interface, reading the data with quick, precise motions. "We need to analyze it together," he said. "There's no time to waste." "I don't want errors." But as she glanced at him, something inside her told her that this human might actually understand the anomaly in ways the rigid protocols of the alien council could not. Hours passed as they worked together, analyzing data, running simulations, and preparing theoretical models for containment. Eric suggested unconventional angles, ideas that seemed risky at first but often uncovered new possibilities. Lyra's skepticism battled with curiosity. Every time he proposed something, she expected failure, yet more often than not it led to insight. Outside, the stars moved slowly, indifferent to their struggles. The station's artificial lighting shifted from soft blue to a dim orange as the cycle changed. Lyra barely noticed. Time had become irrelevant when their focus was on the rift. By the end of the long cycle, they had mapped the anomaly's trajectory more accurately than anyone on the council had managed. Lyra's own calculations had improved because Eric's perspective forced her to reconsider certain assumptions. "You work well with humans," Eric said quietly, almost as an observation rather than a compliment. Lyra turned sharply, caught off guard. I've never," she trailed off. Words had always been tricky with other beings, but somehow with him they felt simpler. "You don't have to explain," he said softly. "Just know that sometimes sitting beside someone isn't about friendship at first, it's about trust, and you trust me enough to let me help even if you won't admit it yet." But sitting beside this human, watching him work, seeing the quiet confidence he carried without arrogance, she realized that trust might not be impossible after all. A soft chime echoed across the observation deck. Another shuttle had arrived, signaling that the council's emissaries were expecting updates. Lyra knew she would have to face their judgment soon. She felt a familiar tightening in her chest, a mix of anxiety and defiance. Eric noticed the tension and placed a hand briefly on the console near hers, a gesture small but grounding. "We'll face them together," he said simply. "Whatever they say, we'll be ready." Perhaps in the vastness of space, amidst isolation and skepticism, a quiet ally could make all the difference. For the first time in a long while, Lyra did not feel entirely alone, and the human pilot with his soft confidence and steady presence had sat beside her. That small act, so simple and so gentle, had already begun to change everything. The stars outside shimmered endlessly, and in their light the possibility of hope and the daring of humanity seemed suddenly wonderfully within reach. The shuttle bay was alive with activity, though Lyra barely noticed. She and Captain Eric had boarded a small, agile human ship, one designed for quick maneuvers in extreme conditions. While alien ships relied on precise calculations and rigid protocols, human craft were built with adaptability in mind. Lyra had never flown in one, yet she trusted Eric enough to follow his lead. "Buckle in," Eric said calmly as he adjusted the controls. His hands moved over the console with practiced ease, tapping and sliding in ways that seemed almost instinctive. Lyra obeyed, securing herself with the harness straps. Despite her careful calculations and the alarms that constantly buzzed in her mind, she felt a surprising sense of calm. Eric's presence was steadying, like a quiet anchor amidst the chaos of uncertainty. The shuttle detached from the station and glided smoothly into open space. Stars stretched in long streaks as the ship accelerated, faster than any standard alien vessel could manage. Lyra's fingers itched to adjust the trajectory, but she hesitated, unsure if human intuition could be trusted in a task that demanded exact precision. Eric glanced at her, reading her expression with an ease that unsettled her. "You'll see," he said softly. "Sometimes the numbers only tell part of the story. You have to feel space, not just calculate it." "We're good at that." The anomaly, the spatial rift she had been monitoring from the station, loomed ahead. It stretched like a jagged scar across the starfield, pulsing with dangerous energy. Sensors on the shuttle registered high levels of spatial distortion. "Hold on," Eric said calmly, though his eyes were sharp with concentration. "This isn't going to be easy. Trust me on this." Every instinct told her to panic, but Eric remained unflustered, steering with a fluidity that made the craft seem alive, almost as if it were an extension of his own body. As they maneuvered closer, Lyra began to notice patterns in the rift, small eddies of energy, weak points in the distortion that no calculation alone could have revealed. Eric's intuition had led them to a safer path, and for the first time she saw how human adaptability could complement precise logic. "You see," he said, glancing at her briefly. "Sometimes the rules aren't enough. You have to read the space, feel its flow." She had always relied on perfect calculations, exact measurements, but here, in this chaotic expanse, trust in a human's judgment had kept them alive. They emerged from the worst of the distortion, the rift's edges pulsing violently behind them. Sensors still blared warnings, but the immediate danger had passed. Lyra exhaled, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "You're remarkable," she said softly, her voice almost unintentional. Eric smiled, though he didn't look at her directly. "We're all remarkable when we work together." Someone or something had created this anomaly, and it threatened to destabilize entire sectors of space. Lyra's mind raced. The implications were terrifying. "This is worse than I thought," she muttered, tracing the energy spikes on her console. "If this continues, inhabited systems will be affected. Millions, maybe billions." "Do you have a plan?" Lyra's alien colleagues back at the station were skeptical, as expected, yet she didn't care. For the first time, she felt part of something larger than herself, something dynamic and alive. Eric's quiet confidence, his insistence on collaboration rather than command, drew her in. During a brief pause, they floated side by side in the shuttle's observation bay. Lyra's eyes traced the jagged edges of the rift, its energy rippling like a living creature. She realized how much fear she had carried alone, how much she had isolated herself because she thought no one could understand her work. And yet here was a human, not only understanding but complementing her ideas, respecting them without ridicule. "You're not like the others," she said, almost to herself. Eric tilted his head slightly, a faint smile on his lips. "Good humans are rare too," he said lightly. "I guess we found each other in the middle of space." Not forced interaction, not empty conversation, but a partner who respected her work and her mind. Someone who could see beyond her isolation and recognize her potential. Their moment of quiet was interrupted by a new alarm. The rift was growing faster than their simulations had predicted. The readings on Lyra's console were flashing red, indicating a rapid expansion toward inhabited sectors. Eric's face hardened. "We need to act now," he said. "We can't wait for the council to decide. They'll take too long and lives are at stake." For the first time, she realized that sometimes risk was necessary, and human creativity and courage could make a difference where rigid rules failed. "All right," she said, her voice steady. "Let's do it." The turbulence was intense, the gravitational forces pulling at the ship from every direction. Lyra's calculations barely kept pace, and Eric's instincts guided them through pockets of safe passage. Together, they were a team neither of them had imagined possible. At one point, a burst of energy hit the shuttle, sending it spinning violently. Lyra gripped the harness, heart pounding, ready to brace for impact. Eric's hands flew over the controls, his movements fluid, precise, and fearless. He steadied the ship with a combination of skill and intuition that no calculation alone could replicate. When the spinning stopped, Lyra felt her breath return. You saved us," she said, still trying to process the sheer audacity of his actions. "We saved us," Eric corrected, his gaze meeting hers. "Together." The danger was real, immediate, and vast. Lyra looked at the human beside her and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope, not just for herself, but for the countless lives that could be affected by this rift. She realized that humans, with their unpredictability, intuition, and courage, had an advantage aliens often overlooked. Their adaptability, their empathy, their willingness to act even in the face of uncertainty, these qualities were exactly what was needed to confront a crisis no one else could manage. Eric glanced at her, reading the expression she hadn't meant to show. "We can stop this," he said quietly, "but it will take more than numbers. We'll need to be creative, bold, and willing to trust each other completely." For the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid of facing the impossible. And as the stars stretched endlessly before them, she felt a quiet certainty that, together, they could challenge even the vastness of space itself. The shuttle cut through the void of space, silent except for the soft hum of the engines. Lyra sat at her console, eyes scanning the streams of data flowing across the screens. Eric's hands moved quickly over the controls, adjusting the ship's trajectory with a confidence she had learned to trust. The rift they had been tracking was far more unstable than they had initially imagined. Its pulsing edges stretched wider than any simulation predicted, sending out waves of energy that disrupted the navigation of nearby vessels. The problem was not only that it threatened inhabited systems, it was that it moved unpredictably, almost as if it had a mind of its own. "We're getting closer," Eric said softly. His voice was calm, but there was an underlying tension she could feel. "The source of the distortion is just ahead. We're not just facing chaos, we're facing an enemy. We have to understand the mechanism behind it, or we won't be able to stop it." Lyra's console flashed warnings continuously, each one a reminder of how dangerous their mission was. The walls of the anomaly shimmered with unpredictable energy, twisting light into strange, distorted shapes. The view was mesmerizing, almost hypnotic, but it was deadly. One wrong move could tear the ship apart. "You need to trust me," Eric said, sensing her hesitation. "Not just my skills, but my instincts. Numbers aren't always enough." The shuttle dipped into a pocket of the rift, and Lyra felt the ship vibrate violently. The readings on her console went haywire. Eric adjusted the engines, twisting the ship through the turbulence with a fluidity that made her own calculations seem slow and rigid. "Follow my lead," he instructed. "We'll stabilize ourselves, but you need to watch for patterns the sensors can't see." Together, she and Eric maneuvered the shuttle through the chaotic field, avoiding the worst of the danger. "It's like a river," Eric said, his hands steady on the controls. "You can't fight the current. You have to read it, move with it." Eric had taught her to see it. She adjusted her own calculations, overlaying them with the instincts he had shown her. Together, they began to make progress. Hours passed. Each moment brought new challenges, sudden surges of energy, unexpected eddies that threatened to crush the shuttle, and strange signals that indicated intelligent interference. The rift was alive in a way that was terrifying, yet awe-inspiring. At one point, a massive burst of energy hit the shuttle, throwing it off course. Lyra gripped the console, her heart racing, certain that this was the end. But Eric's hands flew over the controls, correcting their trajectory with precision. The ship shuddered but held together. "You saved us," Lyra said, her voice shaking slightly. "We saved us," Eric replied, his eyes meeting hers briefly. "Together." Humans were not merely physical beings. They had resilience, creativity, and empathy that no calculation could measure. Finally, they reached the core of the rift. It was a swirling, chaotic mass of energy, punctuated by geometric shapes that hinted at a deliberate design. Lyra's mind raced as she analyzed the patterns. This is intentional," she whispered. "Someone is controlling it, using it to manipulate space itself. You're precise, brilliant, and I'll be with you every step. We'll handle this together." Lyra began entering the feedback sequence into the shuttle's systems. The energy of the rift pulsed violently, as if aware of their intrusion, but she focused on the patterns, the timing, the flow. Eric assisted, monitoring the shuttle's stability and adjusting their trajectory to keep them in the safest path. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The rift's pulses intensified, testing their nerves, their skills, and their patience. Lyra's mind worked furiously, blending calculations with intuition, guided by Eric's steady presence. The shuttle groaned under the strain, but it held together. Then, with a sudden burst of synchronized energy, the feedback sequence activated. The rift shuddered, its violent pulses slowing, the chaotic patterns beginning to stabilize. Lyra felt a thrill of triumph, quickly tempered by the knowledge that the danger was not completely gone. The rift was still active, still powerful, but now they had a window, a chance to study it further and understand who or what had created it. Eric exhaled slowly, his hands still on the controls. "You did it," he said quietly. "We did it." The shuttle moved to a safe orbit around the rift, giving them time to recover. Lyra glanced at Eric, who was studying the displays with a mixture of curiosity and satisfaction. She realized that she had begun to see humans differently, not as fragile creatures, but as beings capable of ingenuity, resilience, and empathy. "You know," she said softly, almost to herself, "I never thought I'd work with anyone like this, not someone human." For the first time, she felt a sense of belonging, not just in this mission, but in the universe itself. She was not alone, and the human pilot beside her had shown her that collaboration, trust, and courage could overcome even the most impossible challenges. Outside, the stars stretched endlessly, silent witnesses to their triumph and their bond. The rift still pulsed in the distance, a reminder of the danger that remained, but Lyra felt a new confidence. With Eric by her side, she could face it, and whatever other threats might come, with a courage and ingenuity she had never known she possessed. And as they prepared to return to the station with the preliminary data, she knew that the small, soft act of sitting beside her had changed everything. One human pilot had shown her that no one had to be alone, and that humanity's unique qualities, their intuition, their adaptability, their courage, were more than enough to make a difference in a galaxy that often underestimated them. For Lyra, the impossible was becoming possible, and the bond with this human was proving that together they could face anything. The station hummed with activity as Lyra and Arik returned from their reconnaissance near the rift. The alien council awaited their report, a gathering of solemn faces and sharp eyes that had never looked kindly on her ideas. Lyra's stomach tightened as she walked through the corridors, Arik at her side. He didn't speak, but his quiet presence was steadying, reminding her that she wasn't alone this time. The council chamber was vast and austere, lit with pale white light that reflected off polished floors. At the far end, the councilors sat in a semicircle, their gazes cold, calculating, and skeptical. Lyra felt the familiar sting of dismissal already in the air. She had faced this before, and she knew how it would begin, questions designed to undermine her credibility, subtle mockery, and dismissive gestures. Arik's hand brushed against hers briefly, a subtle reassurance. She inhaled, straightened, and began her presentation. "The rift is artificial," she stated firmly, her voice steady despite the tension. "It is expanding at an accelerating rate, and the energy patterns indicate deliberate manipulation. If left unchecked, inhabited systems will be affected within cycles, possibly millions of lives endangered." "And you, Lyra, propose what exactly?" "That we take action based on your speculations. We have protocols, approved procedures, and we will not act without full verification. Waiting will cost lives. Humanity has faced uncertainty before. We act with judgment, collaboration, and quick adaptation. We can help stabilize the rift and prevent catastrophe, but only if we move now." She had faced alien skepticism before, but this open challenge to human competence felt different. Yet, standing beside Arik, she felt a courage that had grown over their journey together. A younger counselor spoke, her voice curious but cautious. "And you think the humans' methods can succeed where our calculations cannot? We have already succeeded in navigating the rift's edge and gathering data the council could not predict. We are offering that experience and insight to prevent greater harm." Finally, the head of the council leaned back, fingers steepled. "We will consider your words, but do not presume that they grant you authority. The protocols remain in place, and any unsanctioned action will be considered a breach of station law." "We have no time to wait for permission," Arik said softly, turning to her. "If we want to stop this, we must act now, together." They adapted the human shuttle with her navigation systems and energy stabilizers. Every adjustment, every modification, was a careful blend of alien precision and human improvisation. Lyra marveled at how seamlessly their strengths complemented each other. Where her calculations demanded strict procedures, Arik's intuition allowed them to respond to unexpected variables. As they worked, tension simmered outside the shuttle bay. Council monitors had noticed their prolonged absence and their secretive modifications. Some crew members whispered about rebellion, while others doubted the human pilot's competence. Lyra ignored the murmurs, focusing entirely on the task at hand. For the first time, she felt truly alive, engaged in a purpose that demanded every skill she possessed. When the shuttle was ready, they launched silently, slipping past patrols that might question their authority. The rift loomed ahead, larger and more violent than anything Lyra had ever measured. Its energy waves stretched like jagged curtains across the void, pulsing with a force that could crush ships unprepared. Arik piloted with quiet assurance, weaving the shuttle through unstable pockets of energy. Lyra monitored the patterns, predicting bursts and shifts that even Arik could not sense instinctively. Together, they moved as one, a combination of logic and instinct that allowed them to penetrate deeper into the rift than any standard vessel. They soon discovered the source, a concealed structure floating within the chaotic energy field. It emitted pulses designed to manipulate the rift, clearly created by a faction with knowledge of advanced space manipulation. Lyra's calculations confirmed it. The structure's energy output could expand the rift exponentially if left unchecked. "This is worse than we thought," Lyra muttered. "They're not just destabilizing space, they're weaponizing it." The structure was heavily shielded, and its energy pulses made direct contact dangerous. Lyra calculated a feedback sequence that could destabilize the core without destroying it, but it required perfect timing and constant adjustments. One mistake could obliterate the shuttle. "Are you ready?" Arik asked softly, glancing at her. Lyra took a deep breath. "I have to be." The structure's defenses responded, sending waves of concentrated force toward the shuttle. Arik maneuvered with skill born of instinct and courage, dodging the energy bursts while Lyra recalculated in real time. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Every second was a test of their combined abilities, their trust in each other, and their determination to succeed. Lyra realized something profound. Human ingenuity wasn't just clever improvisation. It was courage, the willingness to act when uncertainty threatened, and the ability to adapt instantly to changing conditions. Finally, the feedback sequence reached critical resonance. The structure's energy output faltered, then collapsed into a controlled shutdown. The rift stabilized, its violent pulses calming as if relieved of a burden. Lyra exhaled, a mixture of exhaustion and triumph flooding her body. Eric's hand brushed hers briefly, a silent acknowledgement of their shared victory. "We did it," he said softly. Lyra smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression. "We did it together." Yet the mission was not without cost. The shuttle had taken damage, and Lyra's body ached from the strain of constant vigilance. But she felt exhilarated in a way she had never experienced in her solitary studies. She had faced impossible odds, worked with someone she had once doubted, and prevailed. As they returned to a safe orbit, Lyra realized how much she had changed. Her perception of humans, of trust, and of her own abilities had shifted. She was no longer the isolated scientist who hid behind calculations. She was a partner, a strategist, a person who could act decisively when the universe itself seemed hostile. Eric glanced at her, eyes soft but steady. "The Council will likely be furious," he said quietly. Lyra nodded. "Let them be. We saved lives." "That's what matters." The stars stretched endlessly before them, silent witnesses to their triumph. Lyra leaned back, allowing herself a rare moment of relief. The rift was contained, the threat mitigated, and a new partnership had been forged. One small act of trust, a human sitting beside her, had changed the course of her life and perhaps the fate of countless worlds. And as the shuttle glided toward the station, Lyra knew that the real challenge was just beginning. The rogue faction still existed, and their motives were unknown. But with Eric by her side, she felt ready to confront whatever came next. Together, human ingenuity and alien precision had already achieved the impossible. And together, they would face the universe's next challenge, whatever it might be. The galaxy seemed quieter than usual as Lyra and Eric prepared for the final mission. The rogue faction responsible for the rift had not revealed themselves fully, but their intentions were clear. They sought control of multiple star systems, using the rift as a weapon. The Council still refused to act decisively, caught in its own hesitation and bureaucracy. Lyra had learned to expect this, but she had also learned that waiting was no longer an option. Eric stood beside her, adjusting the shuttle's systems with his usual calm efficiency. "Ready?" he asked, glancing at her. Lyra nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be, this is it. If we fail, everything we've done will be wasted." Lyra felt a familiar mixture of fear and excitement. She had faced danger before, but never so directly, never with the stakes so high. When they approached the coordinates of the rogue faction's base, the structure loomed from the shadows of an asteroid cluster. It was vast, angular, and menacing, emitting energy waves that disrupted sensors and interfered with navigation. Lyra's console blared warnings as Eric expertly maneuvered them closer. "They're expecting us," she muttered. "The rift fluctuations are stronger here." Every movement was a test of coordination and trust. The rogue base was heavily defended with energy barriers, automated drones, and unstable gravitational fields. Even the most careful approach could be deadly. Lyra worked frantically, adjusting feedback sequences to neutralize the rift's influence locally. Eric navigated the shuttle through bursts of energy that threatened to tear it apart. Together, they moved like a single entity, combining her meticulous calculations with his adaptive instincts. A wave of energy slammed into the shuttle, throwing them off course. Lyra gripped the console, watching as systems flickered and alarms blared. Eric's hands flew over the controls, steadying the ship. "Steady," he said calmly. "We've faced worse, trust me." She did trust him, more than she had trusted anyone in years. He was human, yet in his presence, she felt not only confidence but inspiration. She realized how wrong she had been to underestimate humanity. Their courage, adaptability, and ingenuity were as powerful as any calculation she had ever made. They finally reached the core of the rogue base, a massive energy generator linked directly to the rift. Its pulsing lights and distorted fields radiated instability, threatening to expand the rift further with each passing moment. Lyra's calculations revealed the precise sequence needed to destabilize it safely, but it required perfect timing and coordination. "Can you handle the sequence?" Eric asked, his eyes on her. "I can," Lyra said firmly, but I'll need you to maintain our position. Any deviation and the whole system could collapse." The feedback began to neutralize the generator's output, but the rogue faction responded, sending drones and energy bursts toward them. Eric piloted through the attacks with calm precision, dodging blasts and adjusting their trajectory to avoid collisions. Lyra focused on the sequence, adjusting in real time as the energy pulses fluctuated unpredictably. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Each successful adjustment brought them closer to stabilizing the rift. Each failure could mean instant destruction. The tension was suffocating, yet Lyra felt a strange exhilaration. She was no longer alone. She had a partner who trusted her, who complemented her abilities in ways she could never have imagined. Finally, with a coordinated surge of energy, the sequence completed. The generator faltered, then shut down completely. The rift began to stabilize, its violent pulses calming and its edges retreating to a more predictable state. Lyra exhaled, her body trembling from exhaustion and relief. Eric placed a hand briefly on her shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of their success. "We did it," he said softly. Lyra smiled, a genuine expression of pride and gratitude. "We did it together." Once they cleared the danger, Lyra allowed herself to relax for the first time in cycles. The rift was stable, the rogue faction neutralized, and the immediate threat to countless star systems had been eliminated. She realized how far she had come, from the isolated scientist shunned by her peers to a partner in a mission that had saved billions of lives. Eric glanced at her, his expression soft. "The Council may not understand everything we did," he said, "but the universe does, and that's what counts. Without your calculations and insight, none of this would have worked. We were stronger together than apart." The small act of sitting beside her had blossomed into a bond that had changed everything. The shuttle glided through the void toward the station, carrying with it the data and proof of their mission. Lyra thought of the Council and their skepticism. They might never fully acknowledge the role humans played, or the value of cooperation, courage, and trust across species. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the lives saved, the rift stabilized, and the bond forged in the most impossible circumstances. As they approached the station, Lyra reflected on the journey that had begun with a single, quiet act, the human pilot choosing to sit beside her, breaking her isolation. That simple gesture had led to partnership, mutual respect, and an understanding of humanity she had never imagined. The shuttle docked smoothly and they stepped onto the station's floor. Lyra glanced around, noticing the council members waiting, some with curiosity, others with thinly veiled skepticism. She didn't feel fear. She felt pride. She had faced the impossible, acted decisively, and emerged stronger, and she had done it with a human by her side. Eric looked at her and said softly, "Whatever happens with the council, remember this: what we did matters. We mattered, and together we made a difference. And I'll never doubt humans again." As the council deliberated, Lyra found a quiet corner and allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought of the endless stars outside the station, the vastness of space, and the journey that had begun with solitude. She had believed she was alone, that no one could understand her work or her mind. And yet, a single act of trust, a human sitting beside her, had changed the course of her life. Eric joined her, standing silently at her side. She looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude and admiration. "Thank you," she said quietly. He smiled, the soft confidence she had come to rely on shining in his eyes. "No, thank you. You taught me that precision and courage can work together. We both did this, Lyra." Together. She was no longer the isolated scientist, the one no one sat beside. She had a companion, a partner, and a friend. Humanity's strengths had been proven, not through aggression or dominance, but through ingenuity, courage, and the quiet act of sitting beside someone who needed them. As they looked out at the vast expanse of stars together, Lyra realized that the universe was full of challenges, full of dangers, and full of unknowns. But with human ingenuity and alien precision combined, no obstacle was insurmountable. They had faced the impossible and won, and they would face whatever came next together. In that quiet moment, surrounded by the infinite void and the distant glow of countless stars, Lyra understood something profound. One act of courage, one choice to trust, could change everything. And one human pilot had done just that, sitting beside her softly and showing her that together they could achieve the extraordinary. No one sat beside her until the human pilot sat down softly. Sci-fi story,